Welcome to Shedtune and welcome back to part 2 of the engine build. So today we're going to put bearings in and start building the engine back up. So next on the list to rebuild is going to be the mag housing, and for that you're going to need a bearing which has been in the freezer, a spacer, an oil seal and a bottom oil seal. So the thing about this bearing is, as you're probably aware, or you might not be, it's in two parts. If you freeze them, obviously they make them smaller and then they'll fit in the hole easier. This part goes on the crank, this part goes in the mag housing. So we'll put this bit aside, we'll put some heat into this, and then hopefully, so in order to rebuild a mag housing properly you need a few things. So I put the mag housing on a block of wood so it doesn't damage it and you can keep it level. You need your bearings, your oil seals and your circlip. If you put your bearing in the freezer then it will fit in easier. You can heat this with a heat gun or a blowtorch, get it to the right temperature. Then put your first oil seal in, then your spacer, then your bearing, then your last oil seal, then your circlip. If you need to drift anything in, you can get this off of places like eBay. These are ideal for Lambrettas. In fact, this kit is actually sold for a Lambretta, and it's a drift kit. And it just means that you can put the right size bit on, like so, and use it to drift the bearings in properly or push the oil seals in, and that's what I did with these. Also important is a can of beer and a big hammer. Next thing to do is to fit this half of the bearing onto the crank, and it normally goes on like so. You can either heat this, which is probably the best thing to do, only slightly, you don't need to get it blue or anything, and then it will literally slide over. If it needs a little bit of persuasion, the good old standout grip fits over these a treat and you can literally just tap it straight down. So there you go, a little bit of heat and it just drops straight on. Once again I've put a few blocks of wood under it so that when we put this cold bearing in, if we've got to give it a little tap, then we can be. Rightio. Let's see. Oops. It goes straight in without me having to do anything. I think that's in nicely. So for the rear bearing I'm using an MB one because you get an oil seal that can push in there, and there's also an O-ring groove machined in, which means you can just put a little O-ring in there which comes with the bearing. Sits in there very, very nicely. It just helps that seal superbly when you knock it in with a little bit of heat. And then the oil seal will go in to stop the well, any engine oil or anything getting out of there properly. So that's the bearing in, that's dropped in nicely. Just give it a little tap and then we'll fit the oil seal literally by just pushing it into the bearing, so it's nice and flush. There we go. Let's get it in. Ta-da! That's that fitted. So the next job I'm going to do is put the crank in, and as you can see, these bolts can shear when you're putting them in, as that one did. Luckily the thread came out, so we've got another high tensile bolt, and the process we're going to do is we're going to literally fit the crank in by hand to start with, which is pretty straightforward, but it would be normally. There you go. We've put some oil in there already to make sure that it goes in, and obviously we're going to rotate it as we go along so it doesn't stick the oil seal. Okay, so we're ready to start pulling the crank in. I've got my socket with a little bit of spacing on. I've got my con rod tool so that obviously when we turn it, it locks it and pulls it in, as so. So we'll gently give it a wind and make sure that it feels like it's pulling it in. That doesn't feel too bad to me. I can see it moving. That's kiddie. As soon as you wind it, you can see that it pulls the crank in. Now we don't want to go too mad. Just give it a spin and make sure that it feels okay on that seal. Yeah, it feels nice. Okay, so put that back in there. Get the old ratchet on it again. Keep an eye on how far that crank's going in. Don't want it too tight. We don't want it too loose. Still a little bit to go yet, but that's better. That feels nice. So that's the crank in. I did notice actually when I was putting the main bearing in that there's a hole which will potentially cause a leak, so we're going to have to fix that. Maybe a bit of silicone or something in it, or it'll plug the gap. But apart from that, the crank's in nicely, and I think we're going to put the mag housing on next. So you'll notice that on the gasket there's a little tab, and that normally denotes which way it goes. These gaskets come in different thicknesses so that you can get the exact gap between the mag housing and the crank this side as well. Right, so that's the mag housing on. You'll find as you tighten the bolts up, the gap will decrease, and obviously sometimes the crank gets harder to spin. That's going to be the end of the video for today. Thanks very much for watching. We've achieved quite a bit, as you know. We've got the crank in, the mag housing all done, all the bearings are done. I'm going to have to pull it all out again to seal that hole, but hey, it's not the end of the world. In the next video, I think what we'll be doing is putting the top end on, setting the squish, maybe checking out all the transfers, setting them to optimum performance. Easy for me to say. Hopefully the wife hasn't seen the first video and I don't have a black eye or anything. And that's it. Give us a like, maybe subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.